The house on Rankin County Road looks exactly like every other house on that street. Brick mailbox, gravel drive, a tire swing that hasn't moved in weeks. At 4:17 p.m. on March 19th, 2024, a 14-year-old girl walks down her own hallway with a loaded .357 Magnum held behind her back, and nobody in the world knows it yet. Not her mother, waiting in the bedroom. Not her stepfather, 20 minutes away. Not the friend she is about to call. What the cameras recorded that afternoon will take a Mississippi jury 6 months to process. What the psychiatric records reveal will take longer than that. This is a story of what happens when every system designed to catch a child in crisis, therapy, medication, school, family, catches everything except the one thing that mattered, called the invisible threshold. And by the end of this, you will have to decide where it was crossed. Ashley Smiley was the kind of teacher students remember for the rest of their lives. In Rankin County, Mississippi, a sprawling stretch of pasture in Pine east of Jackson, where everybody's kids go to the same schools and everybody's business eventually becomes everybody else's. She taught at the very school her daughter attended. Parents trusted her. Students sought her out. She had the kind of warmth that felt like a professional skill because it was at home. She was still that person. Her daughter, Carly, 14, was an honor roll kid, active in extracurriculars. The kind of teenager teachers mention when they want to illustrate what effort looks like. Ashley's husband, Heath Smiley, was not Carly's biological father, but the gap between them had closed years ago. Carly wrote him a Father's Day letter. She meant every word. From the outside, the Smiley household read as stable. 2 adults who paid attention. A child who was excelling. Here's a flaw in that reading. Stable households do not always have visible edges. By late 2023, Carly had been self-harming for approximately 2 years. Superficial cuts along her thighs, a behavior she managed alone and in silence. Ashley and Heath discovered it. They responded the way most parents would. They found her a therapist. In January 2024, a doctor added medication treatment for anxiety and depression. Carly told the doctor weeks later that the pills left her feeling wrong, wired, tense in a way that had no name. That report went back to the prescribing physician. The medication was not changed. That is the first gap this case exposes. It will not be the last. Carly kept a journal. She kept secrets, vape pens, a burner phone, a private life running alongside the visible one. On March 12th, 1 week before the shooting, she wrote an entry describing what she called a psychotic break. She wrote about speaking to one of the voices in her head. She noted it with a detachment of someone reporting the weather. No one read that entry until after Ashley Smiley was dead. The journal entry describing a psychotic episode was dated March 12th. Ashley Smiley died on March 19th, 7 days. The question no one has publicly answered: who, if anyone, had access to that journal before the shooting? On the afternoon of March 19th, home security cameras record Carly and Ashley returning from school together. They walk through the front door. Nothing in their posture, their pace, or their proximity to each other reads as conflict. Ashley moves to the kitchen. Carly steps into the backyard with her dogs. The footage, reviewed later by investigators, looks like any other Tuesday. Then Carly comes back inside. She moves slowly. She turns toward the hallway. She walks into her mother and stepfather's bedroom and reaches to Ashley's side of the bed, where a .357 Magnum sits beneath the mattress. The Smiley family kept the firearm there for home protection. Carly knew exactly where it was. She carries the weapon back down the hallway with it held behind her. She pauses at the kitchen entrance, checks that Ashley hasn't come out. Then she walks to her own bedroom, where her mother is waiting. 3 shots. Ashley Smiley is struck in the face and chin. Carly walks back to the kitchen, picks up a phone, and texts Heath Smiley, typing as her mother, "Honey, when are you going to be home?" He responds that he'll be out a little longer. She then video calls several classmates. Some of them ask if they should call 911. She tells them no. At some point, she hums a few bars or something. Then she invites a friend to come over. When the friend arrives, Carly tells him, "I put 3 in my mom. I've got 3 more for my stepdad. He's on his way home now." She directs the friend to hide in the backyard. Heath Smiley walks through his front door at approximately 5:17 p.m. Heath Smiley's 911 call contains one moment investigators keep returning to. He says, "I still don't think she ever recognized me. Not that she was angry, not that she snapped, that she didn't recognize him. That detail has never been fully explained." Carly's defense team had one argument, not an alibi, not a contradiction in the physical evidence. The cameras had removed any possibility of that. Their argument was about mental state. They called Dr. Chris Lott, a licensed forensic psychologist, who had reviewed Carly's full history. What he described was not a teenager who snapped under pressure from a single confrontation. What he described was a child who had been accumulating psychiatric symptoms since she was approximately 9 years old. Depression, auditory hallucinations, voices that told her she was better than other people, that she was elevated, separate, episodes of derealization, the sensation that the world around her was not real. She had been cutting herself since age 12. Her mother and stepfather found out and responded. They got her into therapy. When things escalated, they added medication. When Carly reported that the medication felt wrong, that feedback made it back to a prescribing physician. The prescription was not adjusted before March 19th. In her journal entry from March 12th, written in her own hand, Carly described what she characterized as a psychotic break. She wrote that she had spoken with one of the voices. She noted that the voices had become more urgent, not violent in their language, but consuming in their presence. Dr. Lott told the jury he believed Carly was experiencing a psychotic episode on March 19th, and that she could not, at that moment, distinguish right from wrong. Heath Smiley, called by the defense, described Carly as a sweet little girl. "Ever since I've known her," he said that when she fired the gun and he looked at her, he still didn't believe she was targeting him specifically. He said something felt wrong, not dangerous, but absent, like she wasn't fully there. That observation matters. A stepfather who had just been shot by his stepdaughter was telling a jury she seemed unaware of who he was. The prosecution called Dr. Mark Webb, who reviewed the same records and reached the opposite conclusion. Webb pointed to the systematic nature of Carly's actions. She knew where the gun was stored. She retrieved it deliberately. She checked the kitchen before proceeding. She concealed the weapon from camera view on her way down the hallway. She texted Heath from Ashley's phone immediately afterward. She directed a friend to hide in the backyard. Each action, Webb argued, required understanding, planning, and concealment. Evidence of someone who knew what she was doing was wrong. He also pointed to her journals. Among the entries, a list of beliefs Carly had written down for herself. One read, "It's okay to be evil." Another, "There is no God. Heaven and hell are fake." Another, "You don't need a family." Beside one entry, a check mark. The prosecution's case was built on sequence and behavior. The defense's case was built on history and psychiatric complexity. Both were telling the truth about different things. The jury had to decide which truth was legally operative. Carly rejected 2 plea deals. The first structured, the second a 40-year offer presented before trial. She told the court the choice was hers alone. She wanted the jury to hear everything. Heath Smiley was asked by defense counsel whether he would describe Carly as callous. He said no. Calculating. No, except with math. He added, diabolical. No. A laugh moved through the gallery. It was the kind of laugh people use when they don't know what else to do with what they're feeling. The state's expert and the defense's expert reviewed the same journals, the same medication records, and the same surveillance footage. They reached opposite conclusions. One of them is wrong. The invisible threshold, according to the jury, was crossed deliberately. What the jury never heard is what nobody asked about publicly. Why was the medication not changed after Carly reported it was making her worse? The verdict comes on count 1, guilty, first-degree murder. Count 2, guilty, attempted murder. Count 3, guilty, tampering with evidence. Carly Gregg is 15 years old when the jury reads those words. She stands and hears them. The sentence follows: life without the possibility of parole. She is currently held in a secure juvenile facility. When she turns 18, she transfers to an adult prison. That is the legal resolution. It is not the full story. What the trial established with certainty: On March 19, 2024, Carly Gregg retrieved a firearm from her mother's bedroom, shot Ashley Smiley 3 times, attempted to lure her stepfather home, attempted to shoot him as well, invited a witness to observe her mother's body, and made a specific statement of intent regarding her stepfather that the witness later repeated to investigators. The surveillance record is complete. The physical evidence is uncontested. The jury's determination of premeditation is legally supported by that record. What the trial did not resolve, and what no court proceeding will, is the invisible threshold question. At what point does a child's psychiatric deterioration become visible enough to interrupt? And who bears responsibility for the gap between the point when Carly's medication was reported as worsening her condition and the point when nothing was done about it? The system failure passage. Carly Gregg had documented psychiatric contact dating back years. She had a therapist. She had a prescribing physician. She had parents who were paying attention. They found self-harm. They sought treatment. They monitored her medication. The school she attended was the school where her mother taught. None of that produced the intervention that the March 12th journal entry called for, because no one read it. There is no Mississippi statute requiring therapists to request or review a patient's private journal. There is no protocol requiring a prescribing physician to follow up within a specific time frame when a juvenile patient reports adverse medication effects. No mechanism flags a gap between a reported side effect and a prescription adjustment. Each professional in Carly's care was operating within their lane. None of those lanes overlapped at the moment they needed to. Dr. Chris Lott told the jury that mental illness is often described as an invisible disease, that it is genuinely difficult to look at a person and know what is happening inside them. That is true. It is also incomplete. A journal entry describing a psychotic break is not invisible. It is written down. The question no relevant institution has publicly answered is this: when a juvenile patient on psychiatric medication reports a worsening response, what is the required response time, and who owns that responsibility? That question does not have an answer in the Mississippi statute as of the date of this script. It may not have an answer in yours. Ashley Smiley was 40 years old when she died. She was a teacher. She went into work every day at the school where her daughter sat in classrooms down the hall. Students who struggled in other teachers' rooms tended to find their footing in hers. The colleagues who spoke publicly about her used the word warm consistently, the way people do when they mean it rather than when they're reaching for something to say. She is the reason this case exists. She is also, in the coverage this case has generated, frequently the element that gets processed fastest and moved past, because the questions surrounding Carly are louder and more unresolved and harder to sit with. That imbalance is worth naming. Heath Smiley survived a gunshot wound to the shoulder. He testified on Carly's behalf regarding her character. He described her as a sweet little girl and said he didn't believe she recognized him when she pulled the trigger. Whatever he carries from March 19 forward, he chose to use his testimony to provide context, not condemnation. That is not a small thing. Carly is 15. She will spend the rest of her life incarcerated unless the Mississippi court system revisits the sentence, a possibility that exists in juvenile justice reform conversations nationally, and one that several legal observers have noted may be relevant here. Given her age at the time of the offense, no appeal has produced a different outcome as of this recording. The friend who came to the house that afternoon, who heard Carly describe what she had done and what she intended, who hid in the backyard as instructed, that person was also a child. Their experience of March 19th, 2024, has not been part of any public record reviewed for this script. The medication that Carly reported was making her feel worse. The prescription that was not adjusted before the shooting was not a central pillar of either side's closing argument. It surfaced in testimony and receded. In a case built on psychiatric complexity, that is a gap that deserves more scrutiny than it received. The invisible threshold is not a Carly Gregg problem. It is an infrastructure problem. The tragedy in Rankin County is the consequence of a child falling through the space between the lines of a system that thought it was paying attention. Ashley Smiley deserved to see her daughter grow up. That sentence is the one this entire case keeps returning to, and the one that the legal outcome, the psychiatric testimony, and the systemic critique all manage to complicate without resolving. If you've been with this channel, You know we don't move on from cases because a verdict comes in. We move on when the questions are answered. This one has a verdict. It does not have answers. There's a psychiatric review process for juvenile patients on medication that is being studied at the state level in Mississippi right now. When that process produces a public recommendation, we will cover it. That is a specific development this case is waiting on, and it is the reason to stay close. Subscribe if you want to be here when it happens. Before you go, Carly's treating psychiatrist reported worsening symptoms to prescribing physician before March 19th. The prescription was not adjusted in time. Do you believe that represents a medical failure that should carry legal consequences? Or does liability end where intent cannot be proven? Leave that answer in the comments. The argument matters more than consensus.